Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nicolas Sullivan, and I'm happy and honored to present the Cybersecurity Incident Correlator. I'm joined by my Scrum Master, Edwin and our developers, Nicolas, Velazquez, Gurley, and Roy Goncalves. Our client is Steve Rubin out of the Naval Undersea Warfare Center in Newport, Rhode Island. So our project overview. Our project is we want to correlate network traffic with the use of log files to reduce effort and manpower on the team of analysts going through this data. So if we look at the diagram above, you can see there's a passive boundary and an active boundary. The user or analyst will interact with the front-end dashboard through the active boundary. So let's say an attack were to occur. We would gather traffic from our network IDS packet capture and also our host IDS packet capture, which is on the right but you can't see. We would combine these said files into our clustering and analysis methods and then query to our MySQL database for the analysts to view the alert. Some of the tools that we used to create this project is for our backend, we used MySQL, a MySQL database with Python scripts for our clustering and analysis methods. For the front end, we used an HTML, CSS, and JavaScript web suite with the use of C# for providing an executable of our application. We also used PHP as a bridge between the back end and the front end and between communication within the team. We used Zoom and had bi-weekly meetings with the client over Zoom. The metadata involved within these packet captures include source and destination IP and source and destination ports. For example, port 80 is web traffic or HTTP traffic. So the purpose of clustering, the reason why we wanted to use an unsupervised learning model such as clustering is because if, for example, a denial of service attack were to occur, an IP will be pinging a network 5,000 times. And we could use clustering to easily visualize and sort this data to the analyst. This goes into our first clustering method that we used. We used dbScan because what this clustering algorithm analyzes is it analyzes the distances between data points. So back to my example, if an IP is pinging a network X amount of times, we should see a dense cluster around that attack due to the similar data point values between each data point. The next clustering algorithm that we used was k-means. The difference between k-means and dbScan, k-means, a developer has to set the k amount of clusters. Now I know you can't see right here, but k equals 3, so then we would see a separate cluster right around here, a separate cluster right around here, and a cluster right around here. Now that we have our clustering algorithms, we wanted to validate and account for purity of our data. So we used an array of analysis methods to do this. We also used Silhouette's coefficient in the Davies-Bouldin index. Each of these takes a score for Silhouette's coefficient, -1 to 1, and for Davies-Bouldin, 0 to 1. What this measure calculates is appropriateness of clusters. So if you get a score that's higher or closer to 1, your clusters are very appropriate and they're well parsed, as if you get a score closer to -1 or a score closer to 0, there could be clusters with skewed data points and cannot be optimal. Now this is just a visual representation of Silhouette score with k-means. As you can see on the y-axis, we have the Silhouette score values, and on the x-axis, we have the number of clusters. As we can see, when x equals 2, we get a very high Silhouette score with the data that we're using, as if we look at 0.8, we get a relatively low Silhouette score. I'm going to pass it on to Edwin DeLeon, and he's going to explain the data outputs.
Thank you, Nick Sullivan. My name is Edwin DeLeon. So up here on the slides, we see the data output for k-means clustering. We currently have 2 clusters. One is red and one is blue. So raise your hand if you think the cluster or the attack lies within the red cluster. Don't be shy. All right, who thinks it's in the blue cluster? Okay, so if you raise your hand for the blue cluster, you'd be absolutely correct. The blue cluster, we have a very dense cluster. Basically, our data points are overlapping so much so that it just forms a line. This is where we see the actual denial of service attack. And then now we have the data output for DB scan. This is our second clustering algorithm. I'm going to ask again, who thinks the attack is in the blue cluster? Okay, who thinks it's red? Please don't raise your hand. All right, so in this, I should have said this earlier, but in this graphical representation, we have x-axis representing time and the y-axis representing the destination port. So in this case, the attacker will go after a port 540, I think it's 545 exactly. So we'll move on to the next slide. All right, so log files. What are log files? They're basically files that are generated from the system, an application, whether it's first party or third party, that tells a story. The story can be along the lines of, oh, your application closed or your port closed. We only care about log files that are related to security or malicious activities. So how do we implement this with our project? We use tools such as Splunk and NetFlow to actually collect and gather our log files. And then once they're collected, we push it to our SQL database. Once we collect it and push it to our SQL database, we then compare it against our network traffic. And then we can make it a direct correlation if any IPs or any other metadata, such as ports or protocols, match as well. And we're also looking at how many times these IPs and ports communicate with one another. So up here on the slides, we have source and destination IPs. We're basically looking at what Splunk would output. I know you can't see it right now, but on the right-hand side would be how many communications are going on between these IPs. So for the first row, we have 10.154.196.169 communicated with the 192 IP. And on the right-hand side, it says it communicated 7,500 times, so it's quite a bit. All right, let's get to the exciting stuff. So I'm going to ask everyone who has a phone or a laptop to actually navigate to this link, 498.ninja. I'm going to give you 40 seconds. Please hurry.
It's better not have malware on it.
Give you guys another 15, 20 seconds. All right, give me a thumbs up if you're logged in. The username and password is demo, all in caps. Who is still logging in? Just quick hand. Okay. So let's get started. So the first attack is we're going to actually launch a live attack. Because of the legality, we're not going to do it over the UMass Dartmouth infrastructure. All the back-end computers and machines are somewhere off-site, and it's a private network, so we don't have to worry about going to federal prison. But first attack is going to be what's called a TCP Syn Blood Attack. This basically exploits the three-way handshake. So the TCP protocol that relies on Syn, SYNAC, and acknowledge. So if I were to actually talk to Jacob here, if I were to talk to him and I would be like, hey, Jacob, how you doing? He'd be like, hey, back. So, Jacob said it back to me. So he acknowledges my hello, I say hello back to him, and I acknowledge his hello back to me. So imagine I do that thousands of times within 1 second. Jacob would not be able to handle all those requests. And as a matter of fact, he would probably shut down. He would fall asleep, basically. So we're going to actually simulate that sort of attack. So where is Mel? All right, so that's Mel. She's going to play our malicious actor, and she's going to execute a Python script that does the Tcp Syn Blood Attack. So I'm going to have her execute that script right now. All right, so the Python script is successfully executing. All the packets are being sent over the network. We're going to give it some time, so we'll just twiddle those for a second. Excellent, so it looks like we have our generated report or alert. All right, so we have the source IP and the source port. So with a 10.0.0.2 and coming from the random line port 50,837. The table that's underlined in red indicates red space. In cyber warfare or cybersecurity, we denote this as red space. And then the table underlined in blue denotes blue space, basically the ones being attacked, the attack platform. So red is the malicious actor. Mel would be underlined in red if you want to visualize it that way. And we have a nice graph representation of just what packets, how many packets were sent within seconds. So on the 4th second, we have 998 requests. Look at the 7th second, we can hover over these notes and see how many actual requests were sent. So 996 again. All right, so does anyone know what port 20 and port 21 are? I'm sure a few of you do, but
FTP.
that's correct. It's the file transfer protocol. Okay, so if someone were providing file transfer protocol services and we conducted a denial of service attack, we would basically shut down and degrade their services. Basically, you would prevent that person from being able to successfully upload files across the wire. And at this table here, we have correlated log files. Okay, so this is where Splunk comes in very, very heavily. So Splunk was able to actually pull and extract a log file that tells us there were 6,306 total communications between the source and destination IP. That's quite a lot. Within, I think we waited about like 15, 20 seconds, give or take. That's a lot. I mean, if I were to talk to Jacob again, I don't think he'd be able to handle 6,000 requests in 15 seconds. All right, so here we have our table that shows our clustering algorithms. We can actually view the outputs, so we'll open that up right now. So again, on the x-axis we have time, and in this example we have destination port for the y-axis. Okay, I'm going to ask the room one more time. Please answer carefully. Who thinks the attack is within the red cluster? Okay, great. Blue cluster. Oh, okay. All right, you get the idea here. So after we view our image, we can see our actual analysis methods. So, like Nick Sullivan said earlier, we have an array of analysis methods we use to look at the validity and appropriateness of our cluster setup. So if we look at one of them, for example, for k-means, we have our silhouettes coefficient. This value would be anywhere from -1 to 1, 1 being the most appropriate and most valid, so to speak. We have a pretty nice score for this one, so 0.92, that's pretty high, very close to 1, so we'll take that absolutely. And the same thing with DB scan, we can look at all the analysis methods to basically, we basically look at how it evaluates our clusters. So we have 2 separate clustering instances, and we can evaluate them with all of our analysis methods. So we acknowledge the alert, our brings us back. That concludes the presentation. Thank you. Any questions?